is a recorded event. So welcome to our fourth and final session of our Natural Capital and Land series. This session will look at our 9th Land Rights and Responsibilities Protocol that was launched on the 4th of August about responsible natural capital and carbon management. I'll be your chair today. My name is Sally Reynolds and I'm one of the Scottish Land Commissioners. I'd like to start by again welcoming you all and welcoming today's speakers, which is Emma Cooper, Willie McGhee, Yvonne Edwards, Vanessa McCorkadale and Ben Ingles Grant. The format for this session will be that I will introduce each one of the speakers in turn and they will share some of their thoughts with us on responsible carbon management. We will then have a short question and answer session. We only have an hour for everything, so please ask any questions in the chat box and I'll do my best to get through as many of them as possible. To help ensure we make the best use of time, I won't be asking every question to every panel member. So if you would like your question asked to a specific panel member, just make a note of that in the chat box and I'll then direct the question to the right panel member. A big thanks to all our speakers, but also to Jess in the background. Jess is the most important person here today because she's providing all the links in the chat and the technical help, which I would be lost without. So big thanks to Jess for that. As I said, the new protocol is part of our suite of our land rights and responsibilities protocols. The protocols are voluntary and they set out reasonable expectations for those who own, manage and use land. And it helps them to understand what good practice looks like and the actions they can take to support that. Now, why did we look at this one in particular? So natural capital is a rapidly emerging and evolving market, and the new protocol covers a broad range of considerations around the management of natural capital, encouraging those who own, manage and use land to collaborate with communities and other stakeholders, and strongly encourages looking at the widest possible social, economic and environmental impacts when considering a natural capital project. The expectations within the protocols apply to all types of land ownership and management, and this one is no different. So current, new and prospective landowners should consider the expectations within this protocol and how they can meet them. And we would also really welcome land advisors should also consider the protocol when providing advice on these issues. And we are always here to help answer these questions. We're always available if communities want to know how to get involved, and there's lots more information on our website. And I noticed that Jess has right on schedule put the right link up for us in the chat box. So you can see this full suite of protocols, including this one, and you can understand how to get in touch. If you've got any questions you would like to share, even share some good practice with us, that would be very welcome. So with this protocol in particular, I'm now going to pass to Emma Cooper. Emma is part of our senior management team at the Scottish Land Commission, and she is our head of land rights and responsibilities and plays a critical role in shaping our work on good practice, including our suite of voluntary land rights and responsibilities protocols. And Emma is going to share with us an overview of the protocol and the key expectations. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Sally, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. It's good to see so many people here from so many different kinds of organisations. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we create a protocol and then a bit about what's in this protocol, and then I'll tell you a bit about how we can help you put that into practice. So the first thing we do when we're creating a protocol is try and work out what other people are saying on this subject. So we do quite a bit of background research, gathering published views, looking at research, looking at what other organisations are saying, and we also look at what organisations are doing already. So we find that there's often a lot of good practice happening already that we can then reflect in our protocols. And this protocol was no different to any other. We did all of that background research and put together a first draft of the protocol. Once we've done that, we create a list of key organisations and stakeholders and try to create a good range of organisations who can help us understand if what we're thinking about, if what we're talking about is realistic, and if they've got any other ideas for things that should be included, or if we need to rephrase things, or they think that things simply are not realistic in their context. Now, we work quite closely with our Good Practice Advisory Group. That's Development Trust Association Scotland, Scottish Land and Estates, National Farmers Union Scotland, Scottish Property Federation and Scottish Environment Link on all of our protocols. But for this protocol, we actually reached out to quite a large number of additional stakeholders as well. As you'll all be well aware, this topic is really high profile. There's a lot of interest in it, and a lot of people wanted to share their views with us to make sure that the protocol was properly drafted and reflected things that are happening in real life. So we draft our protocol, we circulate it, we collate feedback. That's quite an intensive job sometimes, and we try to come up with another draft which we send around. And I think with this protocol, we actually had 4 drafts in total. Just trying to collect everything together and make sure that all of our kind of core stakeholders were absolutely on board with the things that we were saying. As part of that process, we actually start talking to organisations about how they're going to deliver it. And that's been a really interesting part of developing this protocol. So actually talking through with organisations what it is that they're going to be doing to act responsibly in this context, where they're talking about collaborating with communities and engaging with communities, where they're talking about different kinds of partnership and governance models, how they're engaging with tenants perhaps, where they're working with other landowners to create sort of coherent environmental projects. All of those things are of great interest to us in this context. And it's been really good to start sharing those ideas and thinking about how those things can be done in reality. So what the protocol actually says, there are 3 core areas of expectations in the protocol. And the expectations are things that we think that people either should be able to deliver or that we recommend they consider delivering. So if we're saying should with something, we think it's something that everybody should be doing. If we say recommend, it's something that we think you should be thinking about, but maybe you would do it in a different way. So the first section in the protocol is on community engagement and benefit. Now, the core principle around this is that communities should be engaged in decisions that impact on them in good time for them to influence the decisions that are going to be made. We also talk in this protocol about how landowners and communities should be working together to think about what the benefits are that might arise from natural capital management approaches and how those benefits can be shared fairly, as well as the risks, and identifying ways in which communities can be not just part of the conversation, but also achieving things and realising their own aspirations through the way that natural capital projects and carbon management projects are being delivered. We mentioned a community benefit fund in there. That's a recommend. It's something that we think that people should perhaps think about, but stakeholder feedback was really clear that that would not be appropriate in all circumstances. So we want to be really open to thinking about other ways of delivering community benefit as well through this. Also in this section, it talks about managing land in a way that recognises the multiple benefits it brings. So land, as it currently is, will be providing access opportunities. It might be providing housing. It might be providing people's livelihoods. It might be providing all sorts of things for places. And we want to ensure that we recognise that and we continue managing land in a way that is thinking about all of those social, economic, cultural, all those kind of variety of benefits and things that it can bring and not but for one kind of singular purpose, carbon sequestration, for example. The second section is on ownership and tenure, and I think this is quite an interesting thing to be talking about. So we're asking people to consider a range of governance options, and if they're wanting to invest in natural capital projects, do they actually need to own land? Or are there ways in which they can work with communities, can work in partnership with others, collaborate with, to get the same outcomes, but not necessarily through the straightforward ownership model that we use for land. We're also asking people to consider the impact on tenants and their rights. We're suggesting that people need to work early on with their tenants and consider joint ventures, be very fair in their approaches, be open and honest, and talk about risks and benefits and how those can be shared between the different parties involved. The last section that we've got in this is environmental. So what we're saying is that landowners need to understand what they have in terms of natural capital. They need to protect it, to restore it and enhance it. So understanding first, establishing those baselines before moving on to make changes that improve things, so that we really understand what the kind of net impact is of actions that are taken, so that everything is genuine when we're talking about the outcomes from these projects. We also think that people should be working with other stakeholders where they can to create those kind of coherent landscape projects. It's not helpful if we have neighbouring land holdings being managed in very different ways on occasions, and so really encouraging that people to work with their other landowners in their areas, as well as their communities and the other stakeholders. That might be Major Scott, or it might be SEPA, or it might be local authorities, that they also need to be thinking about in terms of working with to create those coherent landscapes. Underlying all of that are two key points, which is that offsetting should be a last resort when you've reduced emissions as much as possible. So organisations who are buying into these projects or purchasing carbon credits or owning land for this purpose really should only be using those carbon credits when there isn't any alternative for them. And the second thing is that carbon accounting needs to be measurable and verifiable. So in other words, if you're claiming to have captured X tons of carbon, we need to know that that is genuine. There needs to be a process in place in order for that to be considered measurable and verifiable. So lastly, now I'll wrap up, Sally, because I'm probably over my time already, sorry, is how we can help. So the Scottish Land Commission can work with you to help you understand the protocol. We've got a series of resources, frequently asked questions and so on, and I'll be happy to take any questions in the chat just now, but do get in touch if you want to have a chat about it. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Emma, that was great. And really good to get a good introduction and kind of overview to kick us off. We're going to move now to Willie McGhee. Now he's here with us from the Community Woodland Association. Now Willie is responsible for the promotion and representation of the community woodland sector, providing forestry and governance advice to member groups across Scotland and managing the organisation. Willie is an advocate of community forestry and works as a forestry consultant on community land ownership projects. Willie comes with a wealth of experience, including Forestry Trust, Forestry Commission, advisory panels, and the Forestry Policy Group. And he's going to share some thoughts today on how community woodland owners are and can deliver on the protocol for people and nature. Over to you, Willie.
Sorry, muted. Thank you, Sally, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Scottish Land Commission for asking me to speak about communities and the protocol. As hopefully most, if not many of you know, the Community Woodland Association was launched in 2002. And so we've got some 20 years of representing and working with community woodland groups. And I have to say it's fair to say that natural capital and carbon not only represents a large opportunity for communities, but it's also a challenge, hence the desirability of having a protocol. And as you would expect, communities interact differently with land, which they may own, lease, manage in partnership, or merely be neighbours to others who are developing natural capital projects. And the mode of interaction really affects how much control, how much input communities have in respect of natural capital schemes. CWA members and community groups have been and are involved in natural capital schemes, or are being actively courted by capital developers. I mean, it's interesting. In the last kind of 2 or 3 weeks, I've only been acting director for a month and a bit, but we're being approached continuously by those in the carbon market, carbon developers, carbon credit intermediaries, with a view to accessing either communities to generate carbon or to have us award a stamp of goodness to them as developers. So it has a feel of something which is growing arms and legs, and as was previously said, is very topical just now. And although it's not a new market, it's very new to many communities. And this is something we need to bear in mind when we're discussing just the natural capital, the expression with communities. To date, some examples from our membership, Borders Forest Trust has since 2000 been selling carbon credits. They sold carbon credits from wildwood at a tremendously low price in comparison to today's prices. More recently, the Langham Initiative, specifically the Taras Valley Nature Reserve, are involved in a partnership working with the Woodland Trust, who put £200,000 towards the first Langham land purchase. And this involved a legal agreement whereby the Woodland Trust would offtake carbon credits from new native woodland planting. Woodland Trust are also involved in the Isle of Egg Heritage Trust, where they're assisting developing a tree nursery, but that has a carbon credit element to it. Other groups, such as Neudart, they have been approached by carbon offtake companies, but I think, to date, have been naturally quite cautious. And one of the things that they're cautious about is the fate of a carbon credit or a natural capital credit once it's sold on. Where does it end up? Who does it go to? And how are they then portrayed or viewed by others? And the new development, interesting new development, and slightly before I joined CWA, was that AGUS, one of the member groups, asked for legal advice in respect of biodiversity credits. So it's not just carbon, and this I think is probably going to be an increasing development. And circling back to the approaches to the CWA, this whole concept of natural capital, where it started probably with tree planting and carbon credits, is now acquiring something much more complicated in flavour, bundling, where you've got social, biodiversity and carbon all coming together. And of course, these projects are by their nature complicated. The sale of carbon, for example, is not straightforward. It's not easy to follow. Language such as carbon uptake, carbon sequestration, grandfathering, ex ante, ex post, CO2 equivalent. You know, when you're engaging with communities, you need to establish a common understanding and also to speak plain English. Carbon is bedeviled with jargon, and a really positive step towards demystifying the world of carbon and natural capital is to get clear and simple documents such as this protocol out to community groups and possibly to Scotland's community councils, all of the community councils. That's maybe something for SLC to consider. Legal agreements, I touched on Langham, but they need to be, you know, explicable, clear. Expertise probably needs to be involved in explaining these things to communities. And as somebody quipped the other day, once it's sold, it's gone. You may be aware that English Premier League teams are selling 25 years of television rights ahead in order to generate money. Now, that's, you know, that's a kind of analogy if we want to think about what a community may do for its tree planting scheme or its peatland restoration or whatever. And so for communities to properly benefit from natural capital and carbon, control of the land, being consulted, neighbouring landowners to be philanthropically minded to the extent they would consider establishing something like a community fund, or in some other respect endowing community benefits such as making land available for social and affordable housing. These are all things we have to consider and which are alluded to in the protocol. And perhaps we need to view natural capital projects through a somewhat similar lens to that which is applied to onshore wind farm developments, possibly, and think about tithing from significant natural capital projects. Something that I know has been previously suggested for large-scale forestry schemes, but never really went anywhere. And talking of forestry schemes, communities can be disempowered and ill-informed when land use change happens, and that tends to be the thing that happens in a natural capital project is land use change, and I guess that the one that I'm most familiar with is through the Woodland Creation Grant Scheme, where with a different hat on in the Forest Policy Group, we've catalogued some of the experiences of local communities who've suddenly seen new conifer plantations appearing next to them. So for the protocol to be effective, local communities need to be, first of all, aware, they need to understand, they need to be consulted, engaged, and preferably involved in the financial and social benefits that arise from a scheme and project. So we in the Community Woodland Association, we welcome the protocol, but it's going to be a toughie to get it out there to all communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Willie. Sorry, I just had a message flash up on my screen that put me off there. Apologies. Thanks very much. That was really great and really interesting to hear. And we're now going to move from woodland over to peatland. Now, the next speaker is actually going to be a double act. So we have Yvonne Edwards, who's the Peat and Rural Land Manager at the University of Edinburgh, Yvonne is a forester and ecologist since graduating from the University of Edinburgh in 1997, and she's worked in forestry throughout her career in a wide range of roles, including as a scientist in USA and also back in Scotland on a really wide range of different roles, including spatial analyst, environmental advisor, and a planning manager. And the range of projects is really interesting. And she's joined today by Vanessa McCorkdale, also from the University of Edinburgh. And Vanessa actually has an MSc in carbon management, and she also works in the forestry unit, and her background includes being a coordinator for sustainable development goals. So they come with a really interesting mix, and thank you both for joining us today. And they're going to share the approach the university is taking to natural capital management in partnership with communities and others. So over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great.
Yes,
Hi.
we can. Thanks.
Right. So I'll just introduce. This is a new team and a new project. We started five months ago, so a lot of it's still in development. But our new team is myself and Vanessa, who's going to be our community engagement manager, working with students and connecting the research and teaching with the communities and the consultations. And we have a coordinator, and we're hoping as well to recruit a local. So once we have sites that we're working on, we're hoping to have local site forestry manager as well. So if we just move on, I'll talk a little bit about the project. So the department that we work for is actually working on a wider scale to become, for the university by 2040, to become net zero. So they're looking at avoiding emissions and reducing and decarbonising the whole forest, the estate for Edinburgh University. And then, but part of what Vanessa and I are working on is where it's unavoidable emissions. They believe maybe for students travelling and researchers travelling for 50 years, we'll have unavoidable emissions. And that's the part that we're going to use natural capital, and that's what we're working on. So the basics of what we're doing is that we'll be looking at unavoidable emissions, but the natural capital that we'll be creating will be having habitat benefits and benefiting communities as well. So it's not just, it is peatland, but it's also forestry. And it's also to ensure that, we're hoping we'll be able to work with the Scottish Land Commission and measure community net benefit and understand. I mean, of course, it'll depend on the site and it'll depend on the community and what they want, but hopefully working together, we'll be able to show that net benefit. And one of the things we're working on is deciding how we're going to show the ecosystem services and the biodiversity net benefit as well. And the overall project is 1.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide with those benefits for nature. And we're going to do that by buying land and hopefully through partnership opportunities. So Vanessa, if you could move on to the next slide, we'll show that. So right now we're focused on looking at buying up to 1,000 hectares of land to do woodland creation and peatland restoration. And that's in the first few years. And then what we're trying to do as well is look for partners. Just like Willie said, everybody's contacting everybody. So we're looking for partners to do woodland creation and peatland restoration. But Andrew Heald is actually part of developing this project, and he's got a slightly unique model that we're proposing. And we're really hoping that as community land partners that we get to work with. The proposal is that we have a 50-year partnership, and we will not be buying or selling any carbon through our project. I should say that as well. We're not selling anything. But so we do a 50-year partnership, and we pay over 30 years every year for each hectare of the partnership, whether it's peatland or woodland. And the idea of that is to provide a long-term income to communities. So, and maybe they could employ somebody through the money that's coming in. The money won't be tied to the site or any particular management, so the money be in the community to provide other facilities, other benefits for the communities, and just to ensure that the management will be there as well. So that's the proposal. We've started working with or talking to a few partners, but we don't have any partners in place right now. Thank you. So, yep, that proposal at the present is that we're not going to be signing up to the Woodland Carbon Code or the Peatland Code because we are not selling the carbon. And we're working with Andrew Heald, who's working with other partners to develop monitoring and evaluation. So we will have a transparent and reportable methods to show what we're doing and what the outputs are and that we're achieving what we say we're achieving. But they're hoping to be able to leverage the researchers, the students, even working and learning in the community, develop innovation through monitoring and remote sensing, and try different methods of doing this. So right now that's in development, and we're hoping by the start of the new year to have something to show what we might be using. We talked to Scottish Government about this, and they're saying as long as you have somebody audit your method and validate your method, that would probably work. And then as something in the learning and in the teaching. So talking to the partners that we've been looking at so far, everybody's really interested in working with us on research and maybe having work skills or working in schools. So all of the partners have been really interested in working with the university in terms of that's what we can bring that might be unique. I think it's on to your slide, Vanessa.
That's great. Thanks, Yvonne. So hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So Yvonne's touched on a few points that I'll touch on. So I'll try and zip through this because I know just conscious of time. So my role as the Community and Student Engagement Manager will be to make sure that we've got all of that added social value so that this project becomes much more than just the carbon sequestration side of the project. So as Willie said, we also really welcome the publication of the protocol because it matches our thinking as well in how the communities around Scotland should deliver wider social, environmental and economic benefits. And we'll be working hopefully on developing a case study with the Scottish Land Commission on best practice on this project. So overall, as we've said there, we want to raise the aspirations of young people from across all backgrounds, making sure that sort of education and employment are an achievable goal for more and more people in Scotland, and specifically using land and nature as a tool. So in terms of the types of process that we'll go through with communities, we'll make sure we do a stakeholder analysis whatever site that we're working on or with partners, and we'll identify who those key community stakeholders are, additionally engaging with the communities early on in the process. So that could involve things like attending community committee meetings and really listening to them and getting an understanding of what they would value from working with us. So that's, as Yvonne said, will depend on the type of site, its location, and what the community wants. But the protocol's been really useful in terms of that guiding, that encouragement to consult early on, explaining land management processes, things like that, and making sure that they don't feel it's happening behind closed doors. And overall, making sure that we have community net benefit. So I'll move on to our learning, teaching and research, as Yvonne mentioned. So we want the site to act as an international living lab on climate change, sustainable land management and biodiversity. So the types of things that would include is to make sure it's not a sort of green-led situation or absent landlord, but to have students come on site. So let's have some field trips for them rather than have them stuck in Edinburgh and learning new skills and making sure that it's all disciplines and not just a few. Researchers, of course, on site. So that's for the owned site, but also partners. As Yvonne mentioned, there's been a lot of interest with Edinburgh University being an educational institution, that they want researchers on site to be able to research and use it as a demonstration opportunity, something along the lines of the Living Lab that helps them understand how to manage their land either better or in a different way, or how they've been doing so far. And we hope as well that income generation can be an opportunity from it as well. So researchers might be able to secure future income across a wide range of grant opportunities on climate change, forest and sustainable land research. opportunities. And as you see in the photo as well, there's lots of opportunities there for tree planting. There's quite a few trees that will probably need to go in the ground. So having students come along, we've already done that sort of thing on campus, and they love coming along and being able to plant a tree and engage with nature. And the final one there before I wrap up is that important bit with engaging with the community in terms of the local schools, whether it's primary or high schools, and have students, particularly from deprived areas, to coming along, maybe don't get that opportunity to be in nature, and make sure that they've got access to the site and that we encourage that to happen. So I'll pause there and just finish to say that it is, as Yvonne said, a new project, but we will have a website and we'll have contact details that we can share so that we can consult on the plans as they develop. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Yvonne and Vanessa, and apologies for billing it as just Peat, because it was Peat and Woodland, which actually takes us perfectly from Woodland to Peat and Woodland to now. We're going to close with our last speaker talking about just peatlands. So our last speaker is Ben Ingles Grant. He's the Peatland Action Project Officer. He's based with Urasai the Chalawai Cardaway State Trust on the Outer Hebrides. Ben's role is funded by the Peatland Action Fund, and his remit currently covers the whole of the Outer Hebrides and includes supporting landowners and land managers, including common grazings, to take forward peatland restoration projects. Ben studied archaeology and he worked as a project manager prior to coming into this role. And today he's going to discuss the opportunities and support available for responsible practice through the Peatland Action Fund. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Ali. Hi, everyone. Pleased to meet you electronically, or those who I can see on cameras. Sally's done a good job of introducing who I am and what I am, but I thought I would just rattle through a couple of slides. So hopefully if I can just get a nod that those slides have come through. Excellent. So I'm the Peatland Action Project Officer for the Outer Hebrides, so a relatively small patch of Scotland to cover. And my remit is to help deliver the Peatland Action Fund to the Outer Hebrides and see restoration projects delivered. For those of you who don't know about Peatland Action is a Scottish Government funded project. We have been in existence since 2012, and our targets are set by Scottish Government. So I filter into the Nature Scot arm of the Peatland Action project. There is also Peatland Action working within Scottish Water, Forestry Land Scotland, and also the 2 national parks as well. So we are all working together to try and restore Scotland's peatlands. And we started in 2012, a year before the IUCN started developing the Peatland Code, which has come to fruition in the last year or two, really quite prominently, because of the selling of the carbon credits and the future potential credits as well. So just to make that distinction early on, I work for Peatland Action, or report into Peatland Action, that's separate from Peatland Code, but we can work together in looking to restore projects, restore peatlands in projects going forward. So I came into post in October 2018, and so far we have about 15 potential sites in development across the Outer Hebrides. I actually had a new one pop onto my radar today. I've had a discussion with a landowner, so we're probably up to 16 now. So we're looking to develop a range of projects across the Outer Hebrides, working with private landowners, community landowners, and other stakeholders who are interested in the land as well. And it's not just for restoring's sake, it's trying to look at the wider benefits that are associated with peatland restoration as well. So we know about the climate change emergency that we're experiencing just now, and we can see our climate's changing as in front of our eyes. Peatland restoration can really feed into that and help tackle climate change, but it's also promoting the biodiversity crisis that we're having as well. The photo here is actually on the edge of a Scottish Water drinking catchment. So we're looking at restoring the peatland to improve the water quality in that area and also improve the loch for the wildlife that call this place home. So there are many benefits, not just carbon capture benefits, but there are other benefits associated with the restoration work that we're doing. So being asked to comment on the protocol that's been launched, it's fantastic to see. It's really encouraging, because as part of our ethos as Peatland Action Officers is to work in collaboration with all the stakeholders to make sure that everyone is on board before work begins on site or even development begins. So to see it written down in the protocol is really encouraging, and encouraging everyone else to think about this as well. It will only benefit our projects going forward, not just Peatland Action, but also woodland schemes, etc. So it's encouraging to see that. also enjoyed the section talking about the cohesion and responsibility. So that joined up thinking. There's quite often a tension and an easy conflict. Is it peat or is it trees? What do we focus on? But in some areas it's both, and in some areas it's neither. So having this idea of a cohesion across a landscape, not just restoring it just for the sake of it, but actually returning it to its full potential for biodiversity, for tackling climate change, all of these things being emphasised in the protocols is very encouraging for me to read. And then also just the general respecting one another and identifying who people are. Quite often landowners can be overlooked by other stakeholders, or stakeholders can be overlooked by land managers, etc., and there's can be this vicious cycle. So having this awareness and working together, using this protocol as a framework, a structure to run projects going forward, should help to streamline these things and get these projects delivered faster, so that we can ultimately make our goals. Peatland restoration is obviously my forte, but woodland creation as well. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes many years for these things to come to fruition and for the rewards to be felt. So to get these projects moving faster and quicker off the ground will ultimately do better for everyone in the long run. I thought I would run through a couple of examples of just how I've been working in Outer Hebrides and how the protocol will fit into there and emphasise the work we've already done. So it's a couple of projects that I'll pick out. This is a project in Arnold in the west side of Lewis. So this is in partnership with Peatland Action, Barvis Estate Trust and Arnold Common Grazings. Having had a meeting with the landowner, asked to have a meeting with the common grazings within the estate as well. Having had that meeting with everyone around the table, the clerk for the common grazings asked me to come out to this site to have a look and see if there was any potential to go forward. So we've identified the first phase, which is just under 30 hectares, which is now being completed. We've done restoration work on this area, and we're now looking at a second phase, which could total up to 90 odd hectares over the next few years. So sort of the progression is happening there. Again, starting with open and honest discussions, everyone around the table, fostering this environment of no silly questions as well, allowing everyone to ask questions up front so that nothing's hidden, so that the project can get running faster and off the ground quicker. This was a good project to highlight using the protocol as well, because we had a specific meeting for the common grazings and members of the shareholders in the common grazings. This area was being used for peat cutting, and one of the peat cutters within the area didn't want to give up his banks for the restoration to continue. It's in this area, you might not be able to see, but just up in here, he had 2 or 3 banks up here that his grandfather had opened, so he wanted to keep them going, which was fair enough. We were able to work with him, work with the common grazings to put mitigation in place to allow the restoration in this area here to continue, whilst also protecting his banks down here so that he could keep cutting them into the future and not damage the restoration efforts into the future. A couple of before and after photos just to highlight the work that we're doing. So with Peatland Action, I can be involved from the very beginning, negotiating with stakeholders to get permission of projects up and running, through the surveying work to identify areas and gauging the condition of sites, right the way through to the application for funding and the contractors actually being on the ground. So this was me in one of the rare days where we have had sunshine in the Outer Hebrides in the last few years, doing the survey. So the 30 hectares ranged from old and abandoned peat banks to quite prominent hag and gully systems. So you can see my footprints walking through here is probably not the best, but practiced by myself, but following GPS points to get to a survey point is not always the easiest. We got funding for the project after agreement with the common grazings and the estate, and we were able to mobilise the contractors on site. So this is a nice sunny image of the 2 diggers working away, just to give you an idea of the site as well. So Peatland Restoration is looking to stabilise and raise the water table on a site. So this is the water pools being created after the diggers have moved across the site. So we're very encouraged with the initial works. Again, the digger just working on these hags and gullies to give you an idea of the landscape that it was working on. In some areas it looked like the Somme of peatland degradation, because there was no vegetation and these lumps and bumps everywhere. So the machine was working across here to reprofile the hag edges and put in some peat dams to slow the flow of water across the site. So towards the end of the project, this is the fruits of their labour. This is actually almost bare peatland down underneath here, so with pockets of vegetation. So they've managed to create peat dams running across here, and you can see the pockets of water now building up and slowing the flow of water across here. which in turn will allow the vegetation to stabilise, which will allow peat to be formed into the future. And in a few years' time, hopefully this area the bare patches will be covered in with vegetation. All of this holding on to and further capturing the carbon that's already sequestered in the peatland. And this is just an example of a couple of old peat banks that had been reprofiled. The digger worked along the old bank face and reprofiled here so that all the bare peat is now covered up. Any existing drains that were stripping the peat and releasing carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases has been covered over. So therefore we should be able to start sequestering, the vegetation will recover into the future and we'll start to sequester carbon going forward. This was another project just outside Stornoway, about 5 minutes outside Stornoway, in partnership with Soval Estate, so a private landowner, Ranish Common Grazings, and then also Scottish Water. So this was Loch Horace that I was mentioning earlier. This was a really good example that the protocol would have worked quite nicely with the protocol. We had discussions with the landowner, with Scottish Water and the Common Grazing separately, but then we also had meetings together where everyone got together and were able to ask questions and share potential concerns or any things that we needed to iron out going forward. So again, old drains and old peat banks that have been long since abandoned had been reprofiled and covered over. And the hope for all of this is that, as I said, the vegetation layer will be able to stabilise thanks to the water table being stabilised, and then the peatlands will be able to form peat going forward to capture greenhouse gases going forward, not just to lock in the greenhouse gases that are already sequestered there. So that was all that I had to cover on there because I was wanting to leave time for the questions, but there is a difference between peatland code and peatland action. The peatland code look at how they can offset the carbon that's stored within the peatlands and therefore sell on those carbon units and things. So there's the protocol will help again any individuals, agents, landowners who are looking to go down the code route and start investing in carbon credits, etc. So I'll stop there and leave the time for the questions.
Thanks, Ben. That's great. And thanks to all of our speakers. And we'll now move on to the questions. And it's so good to see how busy the chat is. And it's actually also really, really good to see that there's conversation amongst yourselves. So some of the really technical questions have been answered in the chat to save me not even being able to probably pronounce some of the questions, let alone help with the answers. So I'm going to go first to Willie, if that's okay with a question. So what do you think is the preferred strategy for private land management firms to engage local communities, and which public benefits should take the highest priority? A really easy question to kick off.
Yeah, I mean, there are established mechanisms for consulting with communities, yeah, Scottish Forestry has some. CONFOR, the Confederation of Forest Industries, has a paper on it. I mean, the glib answer is thoroughly for consultation, and in terms of the benefits, the best benefits are really those that are identified by the communities themselves. It could be land, it could be money, it could be social, it could be something else, jobs. So there's not an easy answer. There are places that you can find out about community consultation. I would suggest that there's quite a lot of material out there, and you could go on the Community Woodland Association website and have a look there as a starting point.
Apologies, Willie, my internet just dropped out there, so I actually missed your answer, but I'm sure you answered it admirably, and I hope we didn't have too much of a gap there. Apologies, the internet is a bit unstable with me, so Emma is going to jump in if I drop out completely. With my next question, I know you've answered it, Yvonne, in the chat, but I wondered if you could expand a little bit more on the kind of finance around paying the kind of that revenue to the community. So you mentioned things like local jobs and other local community benefits and your kind of partnership approach. But I'd just be interested if you could just expand on that a little bit, please, because there was a couple of questions about that in the chat.
I'll try. I mean, I must say we are just looking to work with partners and understand what they need for their projects, and there might be a bit of flex, and especially in the first few years of the project, depending on what people need to get their projects going. But what we're trying to do is basically the university have committed, you know, so many millions over the next 30 to 50 years to pay for this, and that's in their business case. So it's literally coming straight from university revenue in this project. And the idea is that so if you had, say, 100-hectare peatland, we would go into a legal partnership and we would pay the partner per hectare, depending on an agreed price. So the price probably to be negotiated. We don't have a set price yet. So a negotiated price per hectare, and we would pay that cash, and there wouldn't be any tie on that cash in terms of how it was spent by the community, if it was a community group or a partner. But what we'd be looking for is to come on and do the monitoring, and if we had an agreed, you know, amount of research or learning and teaching on that site as well. So heads of terms to be agreed, but literally it's the idea is that we'd pay every year for the 30 years for every hectare, and that would be index linked in some way as well. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Yvonne. That's really interesting, and I think there's lots of questions about that kind of finance with different aspects actually in the chat. So I think it shows how much, as always, finance influence these kind of decisions. And I'm going to ask Ben. There's a very quick question there about how were some of the projects, those kind of 2 case studies that you mentioned in your talk, how was the work there funded?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so the 2 projects there were funded either fully or in part by Peatland Action. The Loch Horace project was, one phase was funded by Scottish Water directly. Again, it's all funded by the Peatland Action programme of projects is funded through the Scottish Government. So the Peatland Action for Arno was fully Peatland Action, and Loch Horace was a bit more of a mixed match of funding between Peatland Action and Scottish Water. So yeah, there is funding available for landowners and stakeholders and land managers as well to deliver peatland restoration. If you just put into Google Peatland Action funding, you get our website that will have all the information there in terms of how the fund is open and managed and who you can apply to it and what's applicable.
Thanks, Ben, that's great. And I'm now going to come over to Emma with a bit of a toughie one, or a bit of a look to the future, possibly. So there's a few comments in the chat, and it's very topical about how do these protocols get enforced? So they're voluntary, and this is not just this protocol, but I guess our whole suite of protocols. So how do they get enforced? They're currently voluntary, and what recourse do communities have if they're not engaged in decisions?
Thank you, and thanks to the person who asked the question. So the protocols are voluntary, as you say, and the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement, Scottish Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement that underpins all the protocols is also voluntary. Having said that, we do find that if landowners are shown the protocols, or other parties are shown the protocols, it can really help them to understand what kind of public expectations are now really around how they're acting. And we've often found that that can help resolve issues. Sometimes communities come to us and tell us about concerns they have, and we can then work with them and other parties to help sort of work towards a solution, a mutual solution, and resolve those issues. But as you mentioned, there is also the Land Reform Bill consultation open at the moment. And within that is a proposal that the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement becomes a duty on landowners to fulfil that. And as I say, that really underpins all the protocols. The protocols basically explain how to practically put the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement into practice on a range of different kind of topics. So it might be worth thinking about responding to that consultation, whether you think that's a good idea or not such a good idea, or you're not quite sure, you've got some questions about it. I think it's really important that people are heard in that new Land Reform Bill wherever possible.
Thanks very much. And I think we might get a link to that as well. There's loads of links going up in the chat, so I hope everyone is managing to capture all the ones that they want to. And I'm going to open up a really topical conversation, which I've had many, many times, and they haven't been answered in every context. or you get lots of different opinions. And there's some really good, in our landlines papers and in our blogs, there's some really interesting discussion on this. But I'm going to come, the question has been asked to Willie and Ben, that in the scenarios you've discussed, who has the right to sell those carbon credits? So I think with Ben, it's that specific crofting scenario that has sort of brought it up, but I think with Willie, it's that kind of community woodland as well. So again, another not very easy question, but again, maybe even if you don't have the definitive answer, how has that played out for you as you've dealt with different things? I'll go to Willie first. Sorry, my mistake.
So.
Yeah, I mean, well, I've just had a question from Patrick about crofting rights, and I guess Ben's in a better position to answer that one on common grazings land. But I mean, you know, in most instances, the landowner has the rights for carbon benefits. Where you have, you know, common land or shared land management agreements, these kind of things, then everything's up for negotiations. Because this is a relatively new area in you know, widespread in Scotland now, we're kind of almost making it up as we go along. I mean, and again, I don't want to be glib, but you know, if a landowner wishes to cede rights to a community, or wishes to share rights to community, or enter into a partnership with a community, then that's all well and good, you know. And the University of Edinburgh, I'm very interested to watch that space to see how that goes in terms of, you know, the legal agreement. One of the things that's been pointed out again, and I'll reiterate it, is, you know, even if you're a community owning land, you sell those rights, and once you've sold them, they're gone. That's it. You're kind of, and carbon is calculated over 100 years. So there's 100 years of stuff that's gone. Now, you may have been amply rewarded, but it's a judgment. You've got to understand what you're doing, technically, financially, beneficially, all these kind of things. So it's not straightforward. Sorry, that's a kind of long-winded way of saying it's all up for grabs.
No, that's really interesting, and I think that is actually really good for opening up and sort of showing the complexity of this topic and why our protocol is the first step on, or one of the first steps in helping with that, because it is so difficult and such a complex landscape. Ben, would you like to come in now on that as well?
Yeah, thanks. The diplomatic answer is it depends on the situation, who owns what and where. I know the Crofting Commission put up a very helpful and useful webpage on peatland restoration recently. In terms of who owns the carbon credits, if you speak to the Peatland Code, their line is very much it belongs to the landowner. So the Peatland Carbon Code dictates that it belongs to the landowner, but the landowner should seek to share as much as possible, or seek to share the community benefit, etc. The Crofting Commission released something recently which sort of doesn't align with that, so it sort of recommends everyone who is looking at doing a Peatland Carbon Code project should look into their own legal advice to find out what's going on the ground where they are. So the simple answer is there is no easy answer. It really depends on where you are and what's around. From my point of view in my project, we're offering 100% capital funding to deliver peatland restoration, and we're not looking at carbon credits or management payments into the future. We're looking at doing restoration, covering the cost of the restoration on the ground there and then. So it's far more straightforward. Everyone's on board, all the stakeholders agree, landowners, land managers, other stakeholders if applicable, then the funding is gathered and in place for the restoration to be delivered. So carbon credits muddy the water somewhat and make it a bit more convoluted, as Willie says as well. It seems to be once they're sold, and that's it. So there's a great unease and an uncertainty for people to look at selling these just now, because it's just the market's too new. So yeah, the unhelpful answer is it depends, and there are people looking into it, but this protocol will certainly help to keep everyone informed of any sites or any works that are being done going forward.
Thanks very much, Ben. And I think that's actually a really good way to kind of finish off our question and answer and really illustrate that this is still really new, it's still developing. We are kind of feeling our way, and I really hope that the protocol will help with that and help move us forward. Thanks to Emma and Yvonne, I've seen you answering questions in the chat, and Vanessa. So thanks to you all for doing that. I think Willie and Ben have been as well. So thanks to everyone, and thanks to those of you that have had chats in the chat. That's been really interesting and really nice to see. And I think it's really great to have had so many people here today and to have had so much engagement. I will just like to say a big thank you to all the speakers, to Emma, Ben, Willie, Yvonne and Vanessa. It's been great to hear from you all, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope everyone who's been listening has enjoyed it, and those of you that listen in the future to the recorded session. There is a survey. Please do give us your feedback. The more feedback we get, the more we can make these sessions useful and better in the future. Thank you to you all for joining us today at 4 o'clock on what has been for us a really sunny day, but it's been much better than here listening to these interesting talks. And thanks very much to the background technical support to Jess. That's been absolutely fantastic. Please do contact the Commission for a discussion about protocol. Please do get in touch if you have any questions. If you have any concern about how landowners are approaching this issue, or you wish to share with us some examples of good practice, please do get in touch. We have a team that can, the email has just gone up there. We have a good practice team who are there and ready and looking forward to hearing from you. And the commissioners are available as well. I'm always keen to hear from people. And as I say, it's a discussion we all commonly keep having, which I think shows how high up this agenda is. But I'll just close by saying thanks very much to you all, and thanks for joining us, and thanks for the great questions. Thank you.